Look what they sent us. Is this a joke? We asked for a Tier 1 marksman, not some high school kid for a photo op. The voice of Gunnery Sergeant Croft, a man whose ego was as sun-baked and cracked as the desert floor around them, boomed across the firing line. The assembled Marines from the elite 1st Reconnaissance Battalion, all lean muscle and cocksure confidence, chuckled in response. The sound was dry, dismissive, and carried on the gusting wind. They stood behind their multi-thousand-dollar rifle systems, optics gleaming, their posture a collective display of territorial pride. The woman they were mocking didn't flinch. She didn't look up. Her focus remained entirely on the latches of the simple, unadorned rifle case at her feet. She was of average height, with a wiry frame that seemed almost lost inside her standard-issue fatigues. There were no flashy unit patches, no intimidating tattoos snaking up her neck. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, regulation bun, and her face was a mask of placid neutrality. She was, in every visual sense, unremarkable. But Colonel Davies, watching from the observation tower through a pair of stabilized binoculars, saw something else. He saw the economy of her movements. He saw the way she knelt, not with the casual slump of a garrison soldier, but with the coiled grace of a predator settling into a hide. He saw the worn leather on the sling of the rifle she was now carefully lifting from its foam cradle. It wasn't the wear of neglect. It was the polished sheen of countless hours of use, of a tool that was an extension of its wielder. He zoomed in on her hands. They were steady, her fingers moving over the rifle's action with an intimate, practiced familiarity. If you believe that true strength doesn't need to announce itself, type quiet professional below. Croft, emboldened by the laughter of his men and the woman's profound silence, sauntered over. He loomed above her, casting a long shadow that she pointedly ignored. "Seriously, sweetheart," he sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "This is the big leagues. We're running a joint force advanced marksmanship competition. The final challenge is a shot no one has made in 5 years. What exactly do they think you're going to contribute?" He gestured vaguely at her rifle, an M210, solid and dependable, but lacking the futuristic aesthetics of the custom rigs his men favored. "You bring that antique to a precision rifle fight? Did you pull it out of a museum?" Still, she said nothing. Her response was the clean, metallic click of a magazine seating home. It was a sound of finality, of purpose. The onlookers took her silence for weakness, for intimidation. They saw a timid newcomer out of her depth. Colonel Davies saw a professional filtering out irrelevant noise. He saw the deep, meditative calm of someone who had operated in environments where a single extraneous word could mean the difference between life and death. The challenge was simple in its description and nearly impossible in its execution. A single cold bore shot on a 10-inch steel plate at 2,200 meters. The desert wind was a living thing here, a treacherous, invisible river that swirled and eddied, capable of pushing a bullet yards off course. Every other shooter that day had tried and failed, their high-tech ballistic computers and wind meters proving insufficient against the chaotic whims of nature. Now it was her turn. Her silence was a vacuum, and into it, the men poured their assumptions and their arrogance. They didn't know they were witnessing the quiet ritual of a master. She moved to the designated firing point, a simple patch of dusty ground marked by a faded red flag. She didn't rush. Every action was deliberate, a study in efficiency. She settled onto her shooting mat, her body aligning with the rifle as if they were two parts of a single organism. Croft stood off to the side, arms crossed, a smirk plastered on his face, ready to witness the failure he so confidently predicted. The woman ignored him. She ignored the stares. She ignored everything but the task. Her breathing, once normal, began to change. It slowed, deepened, each inhale and exhale a measured, rhythmic cycle. It was the breathing of a free diver preparing to descend into the crushing depths, of a surgeon before the first incision. She didn't deploy an array of digital gadgets. Instead, she produced a simple Kestrel wind meter, held it up for a few moments, then put it away. She plucked a single blade of dry grass and let it fall from her fingers, watching its chaotic dance to the ground. She closed her eyes, her face tilted into the wind, feeling its subtle pressures on her skin. She was not just measuring the environment. She was communing with it. The men from Recon exchanged puzzled, mocking glances. They had spent fortunes on technology designed to eliminate guesswork, and here was this woman, seemingly relying on some kind of primitive intuition. They mistook her deep, practiced understanding for archaic simplicity. They were about to learn that the most sophisticated ballistic computer in the world was the one housed between the ears of a true expert. She was reading the story the world was telling her, a story written in currents of air and shimmering mirages. Her eye found the scope. The world beyond the circular lens vanished. The taunts, the expectations, the desert itself, all of it ceased to exist. Her reality compressed into the reticle, the distant, shimmering speck of the target, and the invisible river of wind that flowed between them. The calculations weren't a conscious process of numbers and formulas. They were an instantaneous, intuitive synthesis of 1,000 previous shots, of countless hours spent in wind and rain and stifling heat. It was muscle memory elevated to the level of art. Her finger rested on the trigger. There was no tension in her hand, no tremor. It was the absolute stillness that precedes a moment of perfect violence. The crowd held its breath, the playful mockery now replaced by a tense, expectant silence. Croft's smirk had tightened into a thin, impatient line. He was waiting for the crack of the rifle, the inevitable miss, and the final satisfaction of being proven right. The rifle didn't roar. It cracked, a single, sharp report that split the air. The recoil was absorbed seamlessly into her shoulder, her eye never leaving the scope, her body a perfect, stable platform. The shot was gone. For a long, agonizing 3 seconds, there was only the sound of the wind. Then, faint, impossibly distant, a sound returned. Ping. It was a tiny, metallic note, almost swallowed by the vastness of the desert. But it was clear, sharp, and utterly undeniable. A perfect center mass hit. A wave of profound, deafening silence washed over the range. The recon Marines stood frozen, their mouths agape. Their confidence, so loud and unassailable moments before, had evaporated into the desert air. Croft's face was a pale mask of shock. The color drained from his cheeks, his jaw slack. "No," he whispered, the single word a breath of pure disbelief. "No way. That's not possible. A fluke. It had to be a lucky shot." But it wasn't luck, and one man on that range knew it. Colonel Davies began to descend the metal steps of the observation tower, his boots clanging with a slow, deliberate rhythm that cut through the stunned silence. Every eye turned to him. He was a man universally respected, a veteran of a dozen conflicts whose quiet authority was absolute. He didn't look at Croft. He didn't look at the assembled Marines. His gaze was fixed solely on the woman who was now methodically clearing her rifle, her expression as calm and unreadable as it had been before the shot. She was already moving on to the next task, the impossible feat already a part of her past. Davies walked onto the firing line, the dust crunching under his boots. He stopped directly in front of her as she stood up. The entire range held its breath. What followed was a gesture that sent a shockwave through the assembled group. Colonel Davies, a full-bird colonel with decades of command experience, snapped to the most rigid, formal salute of his career. It was not the casual greeting of a superior to a subordinate. It was the salute of a warrior acknowledging another of equal, or perhaps even greater, stature in the deadly arts of their shared profession. "Sergeant Sharma," he said, his voice clear and resonant. "It is an honor to have you at my range." The title sergeant hung in the air, a piece of information that immediately recontextualized everything. The Marines stiffened, their shock curdling into a dawning sense of shame. They had laughed at a non-commissioned officer, a leader. Croft's face, which had been pale with disbelief, was now flushing with a deep, crimson tide of humiliation. Colonel Davies finally turned his gaze on him, and it was as cold and hard as the steel target Sharma had just struck. "Gunnery Sergeant Croft," Davies began, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "You asked my command for a Tier 1 marksman. Your request was approved. You stand here, surrounded by the finest shooters in the Marine Corps, and you presume to judge a fellow warrior based on her gender and her quiet demeanor." He took a step closer to Croft, forcing the arrogant NCO to meet his gaze. "You made an assumption. A loud, ignorant, and unprofessional assumption." Davies paused, letting the weight of his words settle. He then turned to address the entire group. "Let me be perfectly clear for everyone here. This is Sergeant Anya Sharma. Her call sign in certain circles is Ghost, for reasons that should now be painfully obvious. She is the lead instructor for the Army's Tier 1 high-angle marksmanship and counter-sniping program. The rifle you dismissed as an antique? It's the very same rifle she used to set the confirmed engagement record for the M210 platform, at a distance that remains classified, but which makes your little 2,200-meter problem look like a pistol range. He let that sink in. You question her experience? Her service record has more redacted ink than a CIA briefing. The shot she just made was not a fluke. It was a demonstration. It was, for her, a simple, controlled, and perfect execution of her craft. It was a lesson. I suggest you all learn it. The story of the shot spread through the base like a wildfire in a dry canyon. It was told that night over beers in the NCO club, whispered in the barracks, and transmitted over secure channels back to home bases across the country. The legend grew with each telling. Some said she'd made the shot in a sandstorm. Others claimed she'd done it blindfolded. The truth, however, was more powerful than any embellishment. The truth was about the calm, quiet woman who had faced down public ridicule with unshakable composure and answered it not with words, but with a single, perfect act of competence. The culture of the training center began to shift, slowly at first, then with gathering momentum. The swagger and loud bravado of the recon Marines were tempered with a new, grudging respect for the quiet professionals in other branches. The incident became a cautionary tale, a piece of institutional folklore passed down to new arrivals. The lesson was simple: never, ever judge a book by its cover, especially when that book is carrying a long-range rifle. Gunnery Sergeant Croft was the most profoundly changed of all. The following morning, he found Sergeant Sharma on the range, long before anyone else had arrived, going through her morning maintenance rituals. He approached not with a swagger, but with a palpable weight of humility. There was no one else around to witness it. "Sergeant," he began, his voice low and strained. "There's no excuse for my behavior yesterday. I was arrogant. I was unprofessional. I was wrong. I've been a sniper for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like what you did. I am truly sorry." Sharma paused her work, looking up at him for the first time. Her eyes were not angry or triumphant. They were simply observant. She gave him a short, single nod of acknowledgement. That was all. For her, the issue was over. There was no need for recrimination, no desire for a pound of flesh. The lesson had been taught, and the apology, now that it was sincere, was accepted. Her silence, which he had once mistaken for weakness, he now understood as a profound strength. It was the confidence of someone who had nothing to prove. Later that day, Croft watched as Sharma spent over an hour with one of his youngest Marines, a lance corporal who was struggling with reading the wind. She wasn't condescending or impatient. She was a teacher, pure and simple, patiently explaining the subtle signs, the way the heat haze danced, the way the dust devil spun. She was building up the next generation, sharing the knowledge that had been so hard-won. Her legacy wouldn't just be a single, impossible shot. It would be in the quiet competence she instilled in others. A week later, the steel plate with the perfect, circular hole punched through its center was mounted on a large wooden plaque in the main hall of the marksmanship school. The base commander himself had ordered it. Underneath the mangled steel, a simple brass plate was engraved with stark, powerful words: 2,200 meters. SGT. A. Sharma. Competence is quiet, and out on the range, the firing point she had used, once just an anonymous number, was now known by everyone, from the newest recruit to the oldest instructor, as the Ghost Line. Years passed. Colonel Davies retired, and Gunnery Sergeant Croft eventually became Sergeant Major Croft, the senior enlisted advisor for the entire training command. He was a different kind of leader than he had been, wiser, more thoughtful, and infinitely more humble. He made it his personal mission to ensure that no operator, regardless of their size, gender, or branch of service, was ever again judged on anything but their demonstrated skill. He often told the story of his own humiliation, using himself as the prime example of ignorant arrogance. "I learned the most important lesson of my career that day," he would tell the young, eager NCOs under his charge. "I learned that the most dangerous person on the battlefield isn't the one with the biggest muscles or the loudest voice. It's the one you dismiss, the one you underestimate, The one who has honed their craft in silence, far from the eyes of people who think they know what strength looks like. True professionals don't need to tell you how good they are. They will show you. The legend of Sergeant Anya Sharma, the ghost, became a foundational myth at that school. Her name was synonymous with a standard of excellence that transcended mere technical skill. It represented an ethos, the quiet professional. It was a reminder that respect is not a birthright of a uniform or a rank. It is earned through action, through discipline, and through the quiet dignity of letting your work speak for you. The legacy of that single shot was not the hole in the steel plate, which gathered dust in the Hall of Heroes. It was not the nickname given to a patch of dirt. The true legacy was in the minds of the hundreds of soldiers and Marines who heard the story and understood its deeper meaning. It was a legacy of changed perceptions, of broken stereotypes. It was the understanding that competence is a quiet thing, forged in the lonely hours of practice and tested in the crucible of high stakes. True strength doesn't need to boast. True skill doesn't need to announce its arrival. It simply performs, leaving stunned silence and undeniable proof in its wake. Anya Sharma was never seen at that range again. She moved on to other, more classified assignments, a ghost drifting through the shadows of the world, her work unseen and unheard by the public. But she left something permanent behind, a powerful, enduring idea. The idea that a person's worth is measured by the precision of their actions, not the volume of their words. The idea that in a world full of noise, the most powerful statement is often silence, followed by a single, perfect result. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over ignorant arrogance and where silent precision defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.